Death. It comes for us all. It can be hard when someone close to you dies, but they lived a good life, and in the end, we all have to move on. Plus, their replacement has 4K support and ray tracing. Consoles come in waves. Anyone who's been a fan of gaming for long enough understands that after a while, hardware moves on, and if you want to keep playing new games, you've got to upgrade. Because now that all the attention's on the shiny new console and the fancy new games, most companies are going to leave the previous console behind. The death of a console. Personally, I consider this to occur when the company manufacturing the console officially discontinues it. No more units are being made, you can't find it in most stores anymore, it's dead, move on to the second stage of grief already. Of course, games still come out for these consoles long after their death, sometimes as long as 6 years later, but this typically only happens with massively popular systems like the Wii or PS2, and they're typically games that are more casual oriented and also love to release on literally everything, like Just Dance and Pro Evolution Soccer, which makes sense when you think about it. These consoles sold astronomically more than the consoles that were released right after them, and these games specifically target the audience who is less likely to upgrade to the next console. Ubisoft would be great on a desert island. If you can release a Wii game in 2020, you can for sure eat a corpse. I find the average life expectancy of game consoles and the way it's changed over time fascinating. For instance, the Atari 2600. This thing lasted 15 years. It died in 1992, which is after 2 sequel consoles were made, and only 1 year before the Atari Jaguar came out, and 3 years after the SNES debuted. They were still producing Atari 2600s and games for it in the same year Sonic 2 came out. Think about that. I was about to talk about how console lifespans have gotten longer. Joke's on me, I guess. And then every other console Atari made died before they even released. The 7800 died only 5 years. 5200 died within 2 years. The Jaguar? Oh, don't get me started on Jaguar. This is a fun little case of something you see every so often with dead consoles. Sometimes they take their parents with them. Sometimes a console dies so hard that it kills the company. Whether that means they stop making their own consoles and go third party, or they just die altogether, completely. Yeah, releasing the Atari Jaguar will do that to you. This thing's getting its own video, just you wait. Sometimes this happens on a smaller scale. Wondering why Sony hasn't made another handheld recently? You know who to blame. Wait, what do you mean the Vita was discontinued in 2019? What? But of course, sometimes the wound doesn't kill right away, but the scar it leaves eats at them, slowly killing the victim, even after it seems like they've moved on. Despite showing all signs of recovery, the wound inside them never recovers, and eventually, it ends them. The Sega Saturn. This is a hilarious case of a console dying just because Sega was stupid. They decided they'd give everyone a surprise and launch their console 4 months ahead of schedule, only to realize, oops, planning a console launch is a bit more complicated than a birthday party. No one was ready for the Saturn's launch. Most of the games were unfinished, so the launch titles were unpolished, and games that would have been launch titles were delayed. And even worse, Sega just didn't tell several major retail outlets that they were planning this, which pissed them off so much that they decided to just not sell any Sega products. It didn't help when they announced the surprise launch. Sony just walked up to the mic and casually announced that their system was going to cost $100 less.
$299.
3-year lifespan, Sega stopped making consoles 6 years later. Now, of course, companies are almost always willing to embrace the next big thing. As profitable as it is when a console lasts forever, when the future shows up, Nintendo is there to greet. Yeah, right. When the future shows up, Microsoft is there to greet it. But what happens when the future shows up too early and the company's next generation systems aren't ready? Well, then we break out the life support! A spicy little upgrade to give a console the boost it needs to make it through that generation. The most obvious older example that comes to my mind is the Sega CD. Of Of course now, most of us are used to mid-generation console revisions. Hell, a specific portion of Nintendo fans are literally begging for one. But back in 1992, you had to buy a booster seat for your Genesis if you wanted the hardware upgrade. Or you could buy the one that people actually remember, the Model 2. The only thing this reminds me of is like a motorcycle sidecar, an ashtray. My friend said it looks like a Hoover. Now, to be fair, it wasn't a total failure. It sold 2 million units, which isn't good, but it's not a nightmare either. And hey, the ability to play CD games was a big upgrade at the time, although, whereas now games typically have a PS4 Pro enhanced performance mode that just allows the game to automatically run better when played on a Pro. With the Sega CD, they were just selling the same games again, but as enhanced CD versions with better sounds and graphics. That's kind of stupid. Of course, after the Sega CD underperformed, and only did as well as it did in the first place due to CDs being a kind of innovative gimmick at the time, Sega got the message and backed away slowly, right? Is that a fungal growth? Just look at how the Genesis looks with both the CD and 32X plugged into it. The original console's been turned into sandwich meat. And before someone makes the joke, I need you to know that Sega's marketing department made multiple ads implying that the 32X is banging the Genesis. How on earth did this fail? And with my unfathomable psychic powers, I know what you're thinking. Yes. There were some games that required both the 32X and the Sega CD. Have I mentioned that the Sega CD indirectly caused the creation of the PlayStation? I'm not kidding, Nintendo partnered with Sony to try and copy them with a Nintendo CD, but then they changed their mind and kicked them out, so Sony went, "Fine, we'll make our own console with Blackjack and Crash Bandicoot," and then they proceeded to outsell the Nintendo 64 by a mile. So Nintendo learned from their mistakes, right? What do you think? Nintendo 64 DD add-on. I may be getting off topic. Hey, you know what I realized? Kinect for Xbox 360 is basically just Microsoft's version of the Sega CD. Did you know that the Atari Jaguar sold less consoles in total than Sega sold Sega CDs? Scratch that, Sega sold more 32Xs than Atari sold Jaguars. So of course the Jaguar got a CD add-on. Okay, enough about the console equivalents of intravenous fluids. What you want to know is, which consoles cheated death for the longest? I get the feeling it's not gonna be Sega. Of course, as previously mentioned, the Atari 2600 lasted 15 years, from 1977 to 1992. That's horrifying, why won't it die? Intellivision lasted 11 years, for some reason. The NES lasted 10 years, that's not bad, but that's not the full story, folks, because the Japanese equivalent of the NES, the Famicom, not only released 2 years earlier in 1983, but it didn't get discontinued until late 2003. That's 20 years. I was expecting the NES to take a high score, and I'm still shocked by that. The original Game Boy made it 14 years, getting pretty close to the Atari 2600 there. The original PlayStation made it 12 years, from 1994 until it was discontinued worldwide in 2006. It's not taking the throne, but that's still insane. Not only is it better than the NES, but to put that in perspective, Sony was still manufacturing these consoles in the same year that the PS3 was coming out. And then the PS2 lasted 13 years and stopped production in 2013, the year the PS4 came out. Sony, what is your deal? Well, those were both massively successful consoles for Sony. Let's see how long Nintendo's big successes lasted. The Nintendo DS lasted from 2004 to undisclosed. Yes, apparently we don't know the exact date of the DS's continuation. Nintendo isn't telling us. I wouldn't tell us either if I was practicing necromancy. My theory is they faked its death and they still manufacture them in secret. The Wii lasted 11 years. The first model launched in 2006 and the final model stopped production in 2017. On one hand, what the fuck, Nintendo still made Wii's the year the Switch came out? On the other hand, what the fuck, the Atari 2600 lasted longer than the Wii? And just for the sake of mockery, let's look at Sega. Sega Dreamcast died in 2001 after only 3 years. And Sega Saturn, I previously said it died in 3 years, and that's true, but it lasted until 2000 in Japan. That's a 6-year lifespan. Could be worse. The Game Gear. Sure, wait, 10 years? Sega stopped making the Genesis in 1997, but they licensed it to Majesco, who sold Genesises for another 2 years, which adds up to an 11-year lifespan. And the Master System was never discontinued worldwide. What? They're still making new Master Systems. This system released in 1989 and they're still selling them in Brazil specifically somehow. Every other country discontinued in the 90s. Brazil? Wikipedia listed it as 1989 to present. That's a lifespan of 33 years and it's only getting bigger. Okay, fine. Well, I guess it turns out that death isn't real. Alright, fuck the concept of mortality anyway. Now I need to go amend some of my previous statements. Death. It comes for us all. Unless you're Sega.